Hey everyone. All right. Cool. This is really cool. So I am a storyteller, so I think it makes sense that I start by telling a story. I was at my cousin's house not too long ago for a family function. There was a lot of African food, and a lot of cousins that I didn't know were my cousins. And I was talking to my nanny, my cousin's grandma, and I was just catching up. We were talking about life. I told her I had just moved to a new house in East Providence about 3 years ago. It was a good neighborhood. This new house in East Providence, it was quiet. Unlike the apartment that I used to live in off of Chalkstone, where my mom had to call the cops, I can't tell you how many times, because of the neighbors who argued at 2 in the morning, countless times. And this new neighborhood had a park and a playground near it. And there was a playground near our house in the apartment off of Chalkstone, but the one time my dad tried to take me there, this is a funny story. We were walking to the park, and this guy ran by us with this red case, and 2 cops were like chasing him, and then 3 cop cars were behind them, so I never made it to the park. And we never tried to go to the park again. And this new neighborhood I found in East Providence, they didn't really blast bachata music late at night. And I ended by telling my nanny that there weren't a lot of black or Hispanic people in my new neighborhood. Her response to all of this was, try to do my best impression. Well, you probably fit just right in there the way you talking all white. And I laughed, because it's funny. But, I thought about it more, and I couldn't help but asking myself, what does it mean to talk white? I know I'm African American. I know I'm Latino. And I know that I grew up in spaces that had a lot of people who were white in them. And in that moment, I felt out of place. Nani said this with some sass, a big smile, and a hint of pride. Because in this notion that she was making, that I talk white, there was an underlying message that white is better. That because I talked white, I was good enough for my new neighborhood. And I've been doing a lot of reflecting recently because, I'm a youth, I'm 17 years old, thinking about my life, going into college. And I've realized that I've internalized being good enough with acting white for a big part of my life. And this notion, this internalization, stems from the system that we live in that perpetuates economic and social disparities on a basis of race, culture, religion, gender, and so many other social marks. But I also have to let you know that part of this desire growing up and need to want to be good enough came from my parents' relationship. I am a product of my grandmother and my mother who worked hard. I'm a product of hard work, and my mom often tells me that I'm the walking American dream. Because she sees all the opportunities that I'm able to pursue like this, and I'm aware of the fact that they worked hard for me to be here. My mom immigrated to the US when she was about 3 years old, and my grandmother brought her and worked here because they were escaping a civil war that was going on in the country at the time. My dad was born here in Providence, and his parents grew up on the south side and worked and worked and worked so that he can have a life that was good enough, that was better. And as we all know, parents aren't perfect. I grew up as a witness to my parents' relationship, which oftentimes I found was pretty abusive. And I did this thing where that I thought that if I was good enough for them, that if I did the right thing and got the best grades, that maybe their relationship would be okay. Maybe they wouldn't fight, and maybe they would just love each other. And ever since I was little, I had this constant desire to want to make everyone around me happy. I wanted everyone to be happy. I think that's something that we all want. And for me, that meant suppressing my emotions. That meant avoiding conflict, because it was better to ignore the problem and hope that it would go away. And in trying to be strong enough for my mom so she didn't have to be strong, in trying to be good enough, I realized that I bottled up all of my emotions inside and just ignored them. and simply tried to do the right thing. Going to school, this wasn't necessarily the best mentality to have. And existing in our education system, I found that it kind of fueled this desire to want to be good enough. You know, our education systems that we exist in and function in today are still based on a very industrial model that aren't responsive or reflective of students' cultural identities. We don't get the space to talk about who we are in the classroom. We're just turned to listen. We're just told to listen. We're told to do. And that's the mentality that I had going into school. So I also want to let you guys know that there's a very harsh reality that some of us might have trouble kind of facing that kind of perpetuates all of these problems that I've just addressed. And it's the fact that as a country, America values white culture more than it does other. It's often seen as the default due to our history that isn't reconciled with, due to our history that we choose to bottle up inside and ignore and hope that it will go away. I also have to let you guys know that I'm a performer. I was only able to reconcile with my own emotions by acting. You know, it's this visceral experience. You come on stage, you're really nervous, and you share yourself with a whole entire audience. You tell a story to a whole audience, and you use empathy to put yourself in other people's shoes, to consider other perspectives. And that's something that I did. And I often think of myself as an emotion bender, probably because I watched a lot of Avatar: The Last Airbender growing up. But you know, I'm able to channel these emotions that I have despite the fear. I'm able to act as a vehicle for stories and narratives and share them and communicate them to audiences. I actually had my very first acting experience right in this very building at Trinity Repertory Company. I got a scholarship for the Youth Actors Summer Institute in 2012, and I remember first walking into the lobby downstairs. So I was walking in, and I was honestly shook because there were so many people who were smiling. They were all like happy to see me, you know. They were all like, "Camp's gonna be great this year. I don't even know you, but we're gonna have an amazing time." Everyone was happy. It was kind of offsetting due to the fact that that was an uncommon feeling to me, seeing everyone around me happy. And you know, I was young at the time, and I loved acting because it made me happy, but that was as far as it went. I didn't really address this feeling, this underlying feeling that was lingering there all along. And it's a feeling similar to the feeling that I had when I saw my mom crying on her bed and went to go give her a hug. It's a feeling that's a cousin to me clumsily trying to comfort my mom and not knowing whether I was good enough, not knowing how to. It's a feeling that I've more recently realized kind of existed because I looked different from 89% of the students and about 98% of the adults in the program. And it's pretending. Pretending that you know what the hell Quidditch is when you haven't read one Harry Potter book, just because everyone else around you loves Harry Potter and loves Quidditch. It's embarrassment. It's being embarrassed when your dad drops you off to this program because his car is loud and his music's loud, and knowing that your friends' dads drive electric cars that don't make any noise and wear Crocs. It's wondering. It's wondering why your grandmother doesn't just speak English and has to speak Spanish sometimes when she knows perfectly good English. And it's smiling. Smiling so hard that a tear starts to roll down your eye just because someone is smiling at you. And ironically, Trinity Repertory Company was also the place where I discovered more of who I am, more of my identity, by learning about other identities and other emotions. And you know, this exploration of identity was fostered when I went to high school. I go to the Met High School, which is an innovative high school right on the south side of Providence. And it's taught me that I can actually value the complexity of my identity value my passions and my aspirations. We, in this school environment, are surrounded by so many students with different identities, and in being surrounded by this environment that promotes us to have conversations about the cultures and identities that we come from, I was able to learn about myself. And it's a model that I hope many other schools follow, fostering a space for conversation, promoting inquiry, and creating a system that allows students to be aware of their identities in a meaningful and productive way. And now, because I have all this awareness and I realize that the systems that I exist in affect me in a very physical way, whether I want to acknowledge it or not, I try my hardest to affect these systems right back. I pursued a real-world learning opportunity, as we call them, as an intern here with the education department at Trinity Rep. And for the past 3 years, I've been working with creative classrooms. And you know, I chose to have an internship here and was promoted by my school to do so because this is a place where I learned so much about myself. And that contributed to my academic and personal success. But I've been working with Creative Classrooms for the past 3 years, and Creative Classrooms is an arts integration program that focuses on bilingual and ELL classrooms, but offers arts integration lessons that kinesthetically engage students in text. And I remember one day in particular, we were reading Ordinary Mary. It's this book about how, like, one good deed leads to another, so if you do one good thing, then, like, the whole world is perfect. And, you know, we kind of picked it because it met some of our standards that we had to meet for the grant. But Natalie, my mentor, was reading a part, and it was like one of the good deeds was giving a compliment. And the compliment was from one girl to another, and the compliment was, "What beautiful blue eyes you have." I went up to Natalie after the lesson, and I was like, "Natalie, none of these students have blue eyes. You don't even have blue eyes." No one in the classroom had blue eyes, and that's when I realized that these students are constantly told that they're not good enough, that identities other than themselves are better. They're told this in seeing figures of authority and curriculums that don't reflect or respond to who they are. They're told that they're not good enough in the news, in media, in magazines, in policies that are passed, in policies that are rescinded, and by people in our political office. So I learned all of these values, and this was nurtured by going to the Met High School, but I've made the choice to take this in all other aspects of my life, in my entrepreneurship. I'm also a young entrepreneur, and I've identified a problem that I'm working really, really, really hard to try to solve. I actually had the opportunity to be a part of Startup Weekend Education around this time last year. It was September 24th, 2016. And I only had this opportunity because of my mom. She was working the event, and I just went along, and I ended up, out of this, collaborating with Kiara Butler and Taiwo Demola. I brought my perspective of empathy. Taiwo brought her passion for student voice. And Kiara brought her experience with inadequate professional development, and we created Diversity Talks. Diversity Talks is student-led professional development grounded in the core competencies of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and it strives to improve students' academic performance. That's a copy and paste mission statement definition, but I share this with you for 2 reasons. One, because I really wanted to promote Diversity Talks. I have business cards, and I'd be happy if any of you want to talk about having student-led professional development. We made some pretty good progress this past year. But 2, because in investing in Diversity Talks, I've been able to work with my colleagues who understand the severity of the impact of our history of separation. Colleagues who are affected by structures of racism and oppression, and they feel it in their throat when they're silenced in a room full of white men who don't give them the respect that they know that they deserve, who feel it in their hair when they aren't allowed to be in their 2nd grade brush hair club because it's exclusively for girls with pretty straight hair. And for who, like many people in my family, are tired of being tired, are in this constant internal dialogue, wondering whether they're good enough. And we work to create promoting a space to promote conversations, a space to advocate for student voice. And as we've done this work, it's changed and we've gotten a lot accomplished, but it seems now Diversity Talks has been reduced to promoting student voice just so figures of authority will listen, will be forced to listen, will acknowledge that these problems exist. But the reality is that so many of us know that these problems exist and don't have to be told because we experience them on an everyday basis. And I want to end by saying we are enough. In my 17 years, I've learned that doing the right thing isn't always good enough. You know, it wasn't good enough to bring my parents back together. It didn't really interrupt or affect systems of oppression. And I was fortunate enough to be, promoted and supported by my parents to, question my own emotions and to reconcile with my own history, engage in conversation in order to learn and evolve. But the reality is not many students get this opportunity because of the structures that we live in. My Nana tried telling me when I was young that I was good enough, but I was, like 8 years old, going through a lot, and I didn't really understand what she was trying to say. And now I do. I understand that I am good enough. And it took all that to allow me to understand that I am good enough. But in being fortunate enough to realize this, I think about my own privilege a lot. I think about what good enough looks like for the collective. I have so many friends with so many beautiful stories. And I wonder if I'm standing here right now simply because I talk white. I wonder if I'm standing here right now because I'm the comfortable option, because I've learned how to talk in spaces, in systems like this. And I think it's time we start to look into ourselves, to look at our history and how that affects where we are today, to make sure that we do everything in our power to tell students that they are good enough. Thank you.